We're back to the Total Tutor Show, powered by the Simply G celebrity segment. Again, to go to simplyg.com, that's simplyg.com, to find out information on G.J. Reynolds, the playful and powerful warrior, and my website, totaltutor.net. And this is an amazing guest because, again, he's an Emmy Award winner. He is also a New York Times best-selling author. When you talk about sportscasters and career, and that name just comes up all the time, so I want to welcome the program, and I'm going to call you a celebrity, Len Berman. Len, thanks for calling and taking the time to come on the Total Tutor Show.
It's my pleasure. I don't know about the celebrity part, but I have been around for quite a while.
Well, absolutely, and it's an honor to talk to you, especially, and to learn about you and learn about your career. Because every one of our guests, the way I do it, and when you go about education, is I interview people to really learn about their story, because that's what my listeners really like to enjoy, is to learn about how did things start for you and everything. Did you always want to be a sportscaster? Was this something you wanted to be in the entertainment field, especially in news?
Absolutely not. I had, as a kid, I had no thought of being a sportscaster. I really didn't know what I wanted to be. I took a series of tests in high school, and they told me I should be an engineer. So when I went to college, I applied to 3 colleges, Syracuse, Cornell, and Penn, to be an engineer. And I got into Syracuse. I got on the waiting list of one of the others. I forget now which it was. And I wound up going to Syracuse. The first day I was there, I guess I was interested in radio in some capacity, because I showed up at the college radio station the first day and said I wanted to be a disc jockey. And they said, well, everyone wants to do that. And they said they had an opening for someone to read the sports scores on a Saturday night. And for me, that wasn't a problem. I didn't have a date. But aside from that, I really didn't know I could read the sports scores. I know it sounds strange, but at the time when I was growing up in New York, the people who did the sports news on the local television channels were all former New York Giant football players. People like Frank Gifford and Pat Summerall and Kyle Rhodes. And I figured, gee, you have to be a former player to do the sports news, or some kind of sports expert. Of course, nowadays, as we've all learned, any idiot can go on the air. You don't have to. But at the time, I really thought you had to be some kind of an expert, and that's how it really began, reading the sports scores back in college in the 60s.
Well, it's amazing how we get our start and how we get this love for certain things, especially in the broadcast field. The way I started out, I was a professional wrestler, and then I did a wrestling talk show and a radio talk show, and I thought I'd never be back in the entertainment field. Went back, became a teacher, and then somehow, lo and behold, radio came back to me, and it became a love. But you never know how these opportunities become. So did somebody kind of say, you sound great, especially when you were saying the scores and stuff, and saying this is something that you should maybe consider going further into?
Well, what happened was, when I was in high school, I had an English teacher who thought I had a good voice, and he told me that I should become an actor. He was himself an actor. I found out later, after he passed away, that he was one of the founders of the Roundabout Theater in New York City, and he was my English teacher at Stuyvesant. He thought my voice was a good voice, and he thought I should practice and get it up out of my throat as opposed to from my diaphragm, as he put it. And I never thought of acting, and I never considered acting for a second, because I thought it was impossible to do. But it was the first time I ever thought that I could use my voice for something. And I think perhaps that's why I gravitated towards radio, because of this teacher.
And that's so interesting, yeah. And so you started out in radio. That's very interesting. And so basically, tell us your first opportunity in radio.
Well, at the college station, I became sports director when I was a freshman. It was a fluky thing at Syracuse. They had, I guess there was some party in the newsroom, and they fired all the upperclassmen from the campus radio station. So I was able to become a sports director as a sophomore. And I got to announce Syracuse University basketball games and did sports shows and all kinds of sports activities. The Syracuse basketball games, the first game I ever announced, 2 people who played in that game for Syracuse. One is the mayor of Detroit, Dave Bing, and the other is Jim Boeheim, who's still the coach at Syracuse. And they played in that first game I announced. And that was fun. I enjoyed it. And I found sports more interesting than news at the time, because it was more immediate. News at the time didn't have all the live shots and live capabilities it has today. Back then, the only thing that was ever live in news were space shots and political conventions. And I just thought sports was more interesting and more immediate, and that's how I gravitated towards sports. I applied for an internship a broadcast company came to campus, and I applied and won this internship. So I was a news intern one summer in Dayton, Ohio, of all places. And it was a local TV station in Ohio, but the local talk show was the Phil Donahue show. He was just starting out there in Dayton. And they brought me back full-time as a newscaster, a news reporter/anchor. I couldn't find a sports job out of college, so I took this job back at the station I had interned at in Dayton as a news reporter, and I was there for 3 years.
It's very interesting because, again, Len, the competition that's in Dayton, especially because UD has a great program for communications. So it's interesting. Yeah. You came from Syracuse, went over there, and got a job. And at that time, when you were doing this, was this something you just truly loved? Was it like something you said, I want to continue to become better and better in my craft when you were working in Dayton?
Well, I made two decisions at the time, and one I'm surprised at myself. For some reason, I thought everyone was a sports fan, and I learned later in life that wasn't true. I guess if I realized at the time, I might have stayed in news or some other kind of broadcasting. I just thought everyone likes sports, and it's just, so that's kind of a more of a segmented audience. Yeah. But I really didn't enjoy the news we were doing in Ohio because at that time there was a lot of fires and car accidents, and I just didn't find it very interesting. So when I was in Dayton, I just kept applying for sports jobs. And lo and behold, I finally, after 3.5 years, got this nibble in Boston, and they brought me back for an audition. And then they brought me in for a second audition. It came down to two guys, myself and this other guy, for a final audition. And they called me and said, the other guy won, I'm sorry. Then they called back and said, the other guy, his wife is pregnant, doesn't want to leave Peoria, so you got the job. And I wound up in Boston as a sportscaster, so that's where the sportscasting really took off from there.
It's the right place, right time type of deal. And again, we're talking to Len Berman, Emmy Award-winning sportscaster, plus also New York Times best-selling author, and just fascinated by, again, just the way this business works. It works like any entertainment field. You go and you gotta pay your dues. You got to go from one place to the next place. You go from Dayton to Boston. You truly had this passion about sports. And by the way, I had Dave Cowens on my show yesterday, Len, so when you're bringing up the whole Boston thing, so you were a sportscaster in Boston. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I announced Celtics games, and Dave Cowens was playing at the time. I was there in the 70s, and Dave was the center. And they won a couple of championships. And I worked with Bob Cousy on the Celtics broadcast. I actually worked on Patriots preseason games and the nightly sportscasts in Boston. It was a great time. This was pre-ESPN, so really people tuned into your station. There were only 3 stations that people tuned into in Boston for sports or newscasts. And we had powerhouse ratings, and it was a great time. And the sports teams at the time in Boston were tremendous. You had the Celtics winning championships. The Red Sox were in a classic World Series in '75. The Bruins were in the finals a couple of years with Orr and Esposito. And the Patriots in '76 were the best team not to win the Super Bowl that year. And it was a great sports time, and I was there for 5 years. It was tremendous, but I realized at the time it just wasn't the capital of the entertainment business that New York was. Even though I grew up in New York, I just I never considered going back to broadcast there. But after being in Boston for 5 years, you realize all the networks are in New York.
Right.
The wire services are headquartered in New York. The main news, the first thing that came along that wasn't headquartered in New York was CNN. Up until then, everything was always everything. All the networks, everything was New York City. So I gravitated back to New York, and that's how that happened.
And what's amazing when you talk about that is you see that you got to go the pinnacle. If you're looking at New York, L.A., those are the places to be. L.A. for movies and certain things, and then New York, especially when you're talking news and all the different broadcasts that go there. So was it hard to kind of transition to go from Boston to New York, or your experience in Boston made you a prime candidate for New York?
Well, it was kind of a two-pronged effort. HBO was just starting out at the time, and they actually had a lot of sports. And I
remember completely about that, yeah.
I wound up freelancing for HBO Sports in the late 70s. I had a baseball show on. It was called Race for the Pennant, and one year I co-hosted with Bob Gibson. 1 year before ESPN was formed, the late Marty Glickman put together a weekly college basketball game of the week that was on HBO. And Tommy Heinsohn and I announced those games, and and Larry Bird was in college, and Magic Johnson was in college, and we did a college basketball game of the week. And so I did some of that, and then I landed a weekend sports job at Channel 2 in New York. There was an opening for a 6 o'clock weeknight sportscaster, and I applied, and I came in second again. I lost out to Sal Marciano, who was well known in New York.
Yes.
They stuck me on the weekends, and that was a great break for me, because a short time later, they brought over Warner Wolf from ABC to CBS, and Sal was out of a job. But since I was on the weekends, they just kept me there. So I had another lucky break.
It's amazing how you get these breaks and you continue to move on. Would you say, for our listeners out there, especially people that want to be in this field, what kind of study did you do to kind of become better and better at your craft? What would you say?
Well, I think you have to work at the craft. I think the study should be ancillary. I think clearly you take English and writing courses and speaking courses and things like that, but I don't necessarily believe that you have to take broadcasting courses. Where you get the most experience is practical experience. So any internship you can get, any on air, and even if you practice in your bedroom, on audio, that's fine too. You just have to get as much practice as you can, and there's a lot of outlets now. I mean, once upon a time, when I was starting out, there were 3 major stations in each city. Now with all the cable and the internet, and my goodness, anyone can have a show. I mean, look at us.
Well, absolutely, and if I could tell you that story, but our listeners are more interested in you. It's all about you, and that's why I enjoy interviewing people. But I agree. Every time you kind of look at how can you improve things, it's your research. You have to research. You have to know the news. You have to understand your craft and be able to talk about it. And so you were a huge sports fan growing up. You loved sports. You knew sports was the thing that you needed to do. And once you're in the pinnacle of New York City, amazing. And so you're working in New York, but things even pick up more for you, right? From there, right?
Well, yeah, I was doing the weekend sports. I was doing some HBO, and then this new basketball conference comes into being called the Big East Conference.
Which I love, yes.
And they asked me to be their first sportscaster, first play-by-play guy when the conference formed in 1979. So we were doing this, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold.
That's okay.
We were doing this Monday night game of the week, and ESPN was just forming, and it really took off. ESPN took off, the conference took off, and they did that for several years. And then I went over to NBC. They brought me to do the NBC pregame football show when Brian Gumbel left, and I did that for a couple of years, and that then segued into doing the nightly sports news on WNBC, which I did full-time from 1986 until, oh my goodness, I think it was 2009.
Let me kind of jump back for a second, then we're going to take a break, because this is quite interesting for me, is that you had the big deal. You had the NFL.
Yep.
And that's where I remember you, Len. And I also remember you, I think, also doing some Big East games and things like that. I mean, because I'm a Pitt fan and different things, and I remember different things in New York, but your name, the way you got your name was the NFL. Wouldn't you agree? Would you say that before again, we're talking about all the other stuff you do in NBC?
Well, I think that was instant recognition because there were 2 big pregame shows at the time. It was NFL Today, and it was the NBC show, which changed the year each year. And Brian Gumbel had done it, and Brent Musburger was on CBS. So whoever it was a domino thing. What happened was Tom Brokaw left the Today Show and did NBC Nightly News, and then Brian Gumbel left NBC Sports to do the Today Show, so they had an opening. And they kind of stuck me in there. It really was a transition time at NBC Sports because the president, the executive producer, they were changing, and so I was kind of a caretaker for a couple of years. But it was great experience, great exposure. Did get my name out there, and it really helped land the local gig at Channel 4 in New York, which was in many ways even bigger than the NFL gig at the time.
Well, and that's what we'll get to. So we get back more about Len Berman's career, and again, it's still spanning I was about to say spanning in so many ways, and we'll talk more about all that stuff in a way because he continues to be working. He still does all these different things, but I'm so interested in just learning about Len Berman. So we'll be back more on the Total Tutor Show, powered by the Simply G Media Network, and we'll be back in just a moment. We're back to the Total Tutor Show, powered by the Simply G Media Network. You can go to TotalTutor.net for more information. Twitter, Total Tutor, Neil S. Haley, Facebook, and also SimplyG.com. And I'm with Len Berman, Emmy Award-winning sportscaster, plus also New York Times best-selling author, and just learning about your career. And for people listening that don't understand this, you'd say, okay, you went from the NFL to a big gig in New York. What's the difference about working in a media market like New York compared to working anywhere in the United States? Kind of explain that.
Well, the sheer size of it is huge. At one point, I don't know, it was supposedly 10% of the country. It's probably a little less now, but just the enormity of your audience. And when you're on every night, it really gets the juices flowing. What happens when you work a network show, you're on once a week. So something would happen on a Monday. You say, let's go do something, and you couldn't, because by Sunday or the next time you're on the air, it's going to be dated or it's not going to be interesting anymore. So being on every night, and we were a top-rated newscast, and being on with, I've co-anchored with people like Al Roker and Matt Lauer, and New York stars like Sue Simmons and Chuck Scarborough, and it's just, there's nothing like it.
Absolutely, and in that process, when you continue working in New York, you kind of create some niches during that time, right? That really makes you well known with NBC as well. Kind of explain that.
Well, if you can hang in there, I mean, I used to joke that if you stuck Daffy Duck on the air every night, eventually, they'll recognize him at the local deli. I mean, you're well known. You're on every night. You become kind of habit forming. And it's great. I mean, and add all to that the success of the New York sports teams. Over the years, I've worked locally. Just about every team except the Nets and Knicks won a championship, and the Jets, of course. But you had lots of championship teams, and that adds the excitement.
Absolutely. And what would you say is your greatest, one of the thing I think you're still doing involving in the media still? Is it called Spanning the World? Am I correct?
Spanning the World, yes.
Yes.
It's a monthly bloopers deal we started locally in New York in 1987. The Today Show picked it up in 1989. And it still lives on the Today Show today. It'll be on December the 27th. We'll sum up the entire year. And once a month I go on there and we play some of the goofy moments in sports, and there's so much out there, and it's a lot easier to come by in this video age than it was 25 years ago. But it's still what I'm well known for. I'm not saying it's the most journalistic thing I've ever done, but it's still it's fun. People laugh, and the comment you get is you don't have to be a sports fan to enjoy it, which is nice.
So tell me how that developed. How did you come up with this Spanning the World?
It was kind of a goof. We were working the local sports news at CBS, and this goofy highlight showed up of a harness race in the Midwest. And just as the horse was about to win the harness race, he turns around and bites the horse in second place in the neck. And the track announcer at the state fair in the Midwest announces over the microphone, "Oh, that's the damnedest thing I've ever seen." And as it turns out, it's something called savaging, but I don't know anything about horses. And my producer and I grew up in New York playing stickball and basketball, so we decided to stick it on the news. But we thought, well, you just can't say the Yankees win and the Mets lose and the nag bit the other one in the neck. So we decided to call it something. And, that's the beauty of local news. You always have to call it something. The funniest thing I love it was when they say new at 11. And like, what, I want old stuff at 11? Of course you want new at 11. I mean, they always have to call it something on the newscast. So we, as a joke, an inside joke, decided to call it Spanning the World. ABC's Wide World of Sports with Jim McKay, every Wide World of Sports would span the globe for the infinite variety of sports. That was our little inside joke. ABC is going to span the globe. We're going to span something else, and we call it Spanning the World. And it was just one highlight, and we would do it from time to time. And then when I went over to NBC, I turned it into a whole monthly recap.
And how did you had some great producers to find some funny bloopers, didn't you?
Well, we all, it was a team effort. And in fact, viewers would at the time, you didn't have YouTube and 87 million channels. And so it was a little bit of a struggle to find enough stuff every month. Nowadays, there's more stuff than you can shake a stick at. It's all over the place. What
would you say is your favorite blooper of all time?
Well, it has to be the horse that got bar mitzvah. I know you're going to wonder what that's all about. Well, this lady had a harness horse at Monticello Raceway in upstate New York, and the horse turned 13. So to honor the occasion, she had a bar mitzvah for her horse. which wasn't really much. They read a few Jewish prayers and had some wine, and that was it. But the kicker to that story was I was showing that footage once, and there was a rabbi in the audience, and I was a little bit skittish because I thought it might be sacrilegious or making fun of the religion to show a horse getting a bar mitzvah. And the rabbi said that, there's nothing in the liturgy that says you can't perform rites for animals, so there's nothing wrong with a horse being bar mitzvah. So I was rather relieved. And then the rabbi said, that really wasn't much of a bar mitzvah. And I know, I'm from Long Island, I knew that. And then the rabbi said, but it must have been one hell of a bris.
That's a great one. And basically right now, every time for our listeners out there that want to tune into Spanning the World, you visit monthly, you said?
Yeah, it's normally it's towards the end of the month. It's normally a Thursday, but last week it was a Wednesday, and it's going to be a Friday, December 27th. But it's normally the last Thursday of the month, and it's usually in the 9 o'clock hour, and we go spanning the world for offbeat sports highlights.
Well, I'm going to have to start tuning into that, and then I'll have to tweet you out and say I'm watching that, Len, and saying that's so cool.
I also I listed on my website the appearances. I have a website called thatsports.com, and I send out a daily free email to whoever wants it, and I always list on the website when Spanning the World is going to be on the air.
So what other projects do you have going on currently, Len?
Well, I have the website, thatsports.com, and that's just a, there's no advertising or anything. It's just a freebie for people who are interested in the sports world. I've written several books, many of them for young readers. One of them made the New York Times bestseller list, Greatest Moments in Sports. I also wrote the 25 Greatest Baseball Players of All Time. The most recent book was Greatest Moments in Sports Upsets and Underdogs. And what's great is the publisher puts in free audio CDs in the books so you can hear some of the play-by-play moments. So between the books and the website and the Today Show, and I have some other radio and TV things in the wings, so I'm not fully retired yet. I still hopefully have a few years left.
Well, it definitely seems like you do, and it's fantastic. And I'll have to kind of reach out to you in a couple months to have you back on for my author's show to talk about your books, because they're definitely fascinating as well. Especially I could talk sports for hours on end. So any current takes you have right now for our listeners out there involving sports that's a surprise, one of the big news items? Because I'm sure every time you're picked up in a news wire or someone says, we want to talk to Len Berman about certain things, is there anything you kind of want to talk about that you would say right now in sports that's interest to you?
Well, today's headline is the Yankees spending $153 million for an outfielder. And it becomes the same old Yankees. They have no farm system. They have no way to develop their own players. So what they do is they buy other players. They've done it since the days of Babe Ruth. And you would think if they took all this money and plowed it into a farm system, which is so bereft of talent, they'd have a better long-range plan. But that's not the Yankee way. They send a nuclear bomb on the payroll, and then they'll do it. That's how they succeed. So there they go again. But in their defense, they've got a TV network which they own, and they have expensive seats at the ballpark to fill. And it's the entertainment business, and that's how they view it.
So why under Steinbrenner were they able to really do it more often and win with the money, especially when the competition in baseball was basically small market versus big market teams and stuff, and then now it's not working.
He had his droughts too. Ironically, the most success George ever found was when he was banned from baseball for a few years, and and the people who worked in his place developed some players out of the farm system. They named Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera and Jorge Posada and Bernie Williams.
That's interesting. Really? Oh, so.
That's the only time they ever really had a farm system, when George was out of the picture. So it shows that it can be done if you have some smarts in the front office. But in the Yankee way of doing things, it's not smarts, it's dollars.
I'm just amazed by you just telling me that, because, again, I would have not known that being a Pittsburgh guy. And so us developing our farm system is a good thing for the Pirates to continue.
Oh, absolutely. Look what the Pirates have done. I think it's a remarkable story. I used to say that there's no way in hell the Pirates or the Reds will ever be competitive again. And look what they've both done with smart front offices, spending wisely. And I root for those teams. I really do. There's nothing more beautiful than sitting in the Pittsburgh ballpark in the summertime on the river, and I'm so glad the Pirates are back and that their player won the MVP and that they're a factor again, because Pittsburgh's got a great baseball history. The same with Cincinnati. So the whole idea that a small market team can't succeed is a fallacy. Now, they're not going to succeed if they don't try, So clearly the teams that have the resources, like the Red Sox and the Yankees, are going to have a shot. And St. Louis has some pretty good resources, and they're in it quite often. And money gives you a chance to be in the game, but you can be really smart. And Oakland's proven it for years. So I root for those small markets.
So, Len, is baseball your favorite sport? What was your favorite sport?
Well, I grew up on baseball. I was a Mickey Mantle fan, so I think baseball was always in my heart. When I was growing up, my team was in the World Series every single year, so how could you not be a baseball fan?
So you're a huge Yankee fan then?
No, I was as a kid. What happens is you learn pretty fast. When you work in Ohio and have to cover the Cincinnati Reds, and when you're the voice of the Celtics in Boston and cover the Red Sox, you don't root for anything. You root for people. So, for me, Don Mattingly can never do any wrong, and John Havlicek can never do anything wrong, and Johnny Bench and people I've covered, and Dave Cowens. These are my heroes, but it's not that I'm rooting for them. It's just I know them as people, and I want them to do well.
That's what happens to me in radio when I interview athletes. I root for them and not the team as much anymore, and it happens in so many ways. Well, Len, yep. It's been just a pleasure taking the time, and I'm definitely going to have you back on to talk about your book in a couple months. But where can our listeners, I guess, learn more about you, sign up for your email, and also purchase your books and learn more about you?
Everything's at thatsports.com, or just Google my name and you'll find me.
And I see you're on Twitter, too, so you're keeping up with all that stuff. That's good.
I'm there at Len Berman Sports, yep.
And I'm sure people tweet you questions about sports because you seem like you're just a sports aficionado in so many ways.
Well, they tweet me there, and also on my website, they're always, I'm answering hundreds of emails a day. So if you're going to write to me, just keep one sentence, okay? Because anything more, it goes delete. I don't have time to read people's life stories. But if you ask me a quick question, I'm happy to answer.
And any new books coming out? You think you're going to write something else?
Well, we're thinking about it. The publisher wants me to write another book based on spanning the world. I'm not sure I'm going to do it yet. It takes a lot of time and effort, and what's really hard, as you know, is the promotional aspects of books. So I don't mind writing them. It's the promotion that's hard. So I'm thinking about it.
Well, I'm going to send you the one-sentence question, especially when I'm thinking a sports team's going to do really well. What's your take? Because you really have that knowledge, and it was an honor to have you on the show, and thanks again for calling, Len.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, take care. All right, bye-bye. You're listening to the Total Tutor Show, powered by the Simply G Media Network, and we'll be back in just a moment.